What if a single look at the cross could change a life forever? Picture this: Jerusalem, on a rocky outcrop called Golgotha, looms under a sky choked with unnatural darkness. The air is thick with dust and despair. At the center stands Longinus, a Roman centurion, his armor scarred from countless battles. His eyes, cold as steel, survey the chaos. His orders are simple: ensure the execution of a man named Jesus of Nazareth. But this is no ordinary day. This is the moment that split history in two. To him, Jesus was just another rebel. Yet as the sky darkened and the ground trembled, doubt crept into his heart. Could this be more than a routine execution? Jesus' eyes, though bloodied, held a peace that unnerved Longinus. The centurion had seen men beg, curse, or crumble under Rome's wrath. But this man was different. Whispers of miracles trailed him: healings, teachings, claims of divinity. Could this moment hold a truth he'd never known? Over the next 30 minutes, we'll walk through the dust of Golgotha, witness a soldier's awakening, and trace a legacy that still burns bright. Follow me till the end. Let's step into that day, feel the weight of that hill, and see what Longinus saw. A story of violence, grace, and impossible change is about to unfold. In a world of blood and power, destiny called. Long ago, in the heart of a restless empire, a storm was brewing. In Jerusalem, the spring air carried the scent of olive groves and the clamor of Passover pilgrims flooding the city. Roman banners fluttered above stone walls, a stark reminder of who held power. At the center of this volatile moment stood Longinus, a Roman centurion, his face etched with the scars of countless campaigns. His armor, dented but polished, clinked as he strode through the city's narrow streets. His orders were clear: supervise the execution of 3 condemned men on a hill called Golgotha. One of them was Jesus of Nazareth, a name that stirred whispers of rebellion and miracles. But this was no ordinary day. Golgotha, the place of the skull, rose grimly outside the city. Its name alone sent shivers through the locals, a barren knoll where Rome displayed its cruelty. Longinus had seen death before. Rebels crucified, thieves broken, traitors silenced. To him it was routine. Yet as he marched his men toward the hill, something felt off. The sky hung heavy, clouds swirling unnaturally. The crowd's shouts, some angry, some weeping, echoed in his ears. Jesus, the man at the center, carried his cross through a sea of faces. Blood streaked his face, a crown of thorns biting into his brow. Longinus watched, his expression a mask of indifference. But beneath his stoic exterior, a question stirred. Who was this man? Yet destiny doesn't wait for answers. Longinus was no stranger to Rome's iron grip. Born in a distant province, he'd risen through the ranks by sheer will. Now in his late 30s, he commanded a century of soldiers, 80 men who feared his sharp tongue and sharper sword. His life was duty: enforce order, crush dissent, obey the emperor. But years of bloodshed had left him hollow. Nights were haunted by faces of the dead, their cries blending with the clink of coins in his purse. Jerusalem was just another posting, another city to control. Yet the Jews were different. Their faith in one God, their stubborn hope, baffled him. And this Jesus, called a prophet, a healer, even a king, unsettled him most. Whispers of his miracles reached Longinus's ears, the blind seeing, the lame walking. He dismissed them as tales for fools. But something about Jesus' calm defiance gnawed at him. The Via Dolorosa, the path to Golgotha, was a spectacle of suffering. Jesus stumbled under the cross's weight, his body torn by Roman scourges. Longinus saw a woman, Mary, his mother, her eyes brimming with silent grief. He heard Jesus speak to weeping women, "Do not weep for me, but for yourselves." Even in agony, his voice carried authority, not despair. Longinus's men mocked, but he stayed silent. He'd seen men break under less, yet this man's strength was otherworldly. The crowd parted as Jesus fell, rose, and fell again. Longinus's hand rested on his sword, ready for trouble. But trouble wasn't coming from Jesus. It was brewing in the heavens. And then, the world itself seemed to pause. The sky darkened to an eerie twilight. Longinus's men exchanged nervous glances. The air grew cold, the ground unsteady. Golgotha was no longer just a hill. It was a stage where eternity hung in the balance. Longinus stood at the foot of Jesus' erected cross, his shadow merging with the crowds. The man before him, painful and bleeding, bore no trace of hatred. His eyes, though dimming, held a love that pierced the centurion's armor. Longinus had killed without blinking, yet this execution felt different. The Jews spoke of a Messiah, a deliverer. Could this broken figure be him? The thought was absurd, yet it lingered. This was no ordinary prisoner, no ordinary death. Soldiers preparing to execute, the crowd jeered, and Longinus watched. His heart, long buried under duty, stirred with a question he couldn't shake. What power could make a man face death like this? The answer, though he didn't know it yet, was about to change his life and the world forever. But what Longinus saw next would shatter his world entirely. When heaven wept, a soldier's world began to crack. Darkness swallowed Golgotha, as if the sun itself had turned away. It was noon, yet the sky churned black, an unnatural twilight cloaking the hill. The hill of Golgotha was wrapped in silence. 3 crosses stood ready, cold and unfeeling. Among the executioners, Longinus stepped forward, his gaze as hard as steel. They stripped Jesus and threw him onto the cross. Longinus held down his right arm. Another soldier placed a nail against his hand. The first blow of the hammer thundered like a storm in Longinus's heart. Jesus did not scream. He looked at Longinus with gentleness. That gaze pierced the soldier's soul. Longinus didn't know why his heart ached. The final hammer blow echoed. The cross was hoisted upright. Jesus' whole body jolted, then sagged. The 2 thieves on either side began to scream in pain. Jesus did not scream. His first words stunned the hill. "Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do." Longinus froze. Forgive? These soldiers? This crowd? Himself? The idea was absurd to a man who lived by the sword. Yet Jesus' voice, weak but resolute, cut deeper than any blade. The centurion's eyes darted to the inscription above. King of the Jews. Mockery, yes, but something in Jesus' presence made it feel like truth. Could this man truly be a king? The soldiers did not leave. They were ordered to stand guard until the end. No body could be removed until death was certain. Waiting for the final breath, the fading groans. They kept watch until all life drained away. Longinus, the Roman centurion, stood firm at the foot of 3 crosses, his spear gripped tightly. His men muttered nervously, their usual bravado shaken. The man in the center, Jesus of Nazareth, hung broken but unbowed. The crowds roared, and the crowd's taunts pierced the air. If you're the Son of God, come down. Yet Jesus' eyes, bloodied but steady, held no trace of defeat, only a love that burned through the chaos. Longinus, mere feet from the cross, felt an unfamiliar pull. This was no ordinary execution. Something eternal was unfolding. The journey to Golgotha had been a brutal spectacle. Longinus had watched Jesus stagger along the Via Dolorosa, the path of suffering. Scourged until his flesh hung in strips, crowned with thorns that drew rivers of blood, Jesus bore a cross that crushed his shoulders. He fell once, twice, 3 times, each collapsed, drawing gasps from the crowd. Longinus saw a woman, Mary, his mother, clutch her chest, her silent tears louder than the mob's jeers. Jesus still speaks. Do not weep for me, but for your children. Even in torment, his words carried a strength that unnerved the centurion. Who could face such pain with such grace? But the heavens had more to say. On Golgotha, the crosses were raised with a sickening thud. Longinus supervised, his voice barking orders as nails tore through flesh. The thieves cursed and writhed, but Jesus was different. The darkness deepened, the air grew colder. A thief hung beside Jesus, mocking him, "If you are the Christ, save yourself, and us too." The other turned and rasped, "We deserve this, but this man has done no wrong." He pleaded, "Lord, remember me when you enter your kingdom." Jesus' reply shook Longinus. "Today you will be with me in paradise." Mercy, even now? Longinus's mind raced. He'd seen men beg for death, but this man offered life. Now hanging on the cross, Jesus, though in agony, did not forget his mother. He looked down and saw Mary standing there, quietly weeping. Beside her stood the disciple John, the one he loved. Jesus said, "Woman, behold your son." Then he said to John, "Behold your mother." In his final hours, he cared for others. Longinus, trained to crush weakness, felt his own heart waver. What power could drive such compassion? And then the world itself rebelled. At the 9th hour, Jesus cried out, my God, why have you forsaken me?" The anguish in his voice pierced the darkness, echoing a pain Longinus couldn't name. Moments later, with a voice that shook the hill, Jesus declared, "It is finished," and breathed his last. The earth quaked violently, rocks splitting like brittle bones. A distant rumble signaled the temple's veil tearing in two. Longinus's men stumbled, shouting in fear. The crowd wailed, some beating their chests in despair. This was no mere death. Longinus stood rooted, his spear heavy in his hand. The signs, darkness, quake, torn veil, were undeniable. The Jews spoke of a Messiah, a deliverer sent by God. Could this broken man, now silent, be him? Longinus's world, built on order and violence, began to crumble. He'd enforced Rome's will without question, but this moment defied all he knew. The man on the cross had faced death not with fear, but with purpose. His words, forgiveness, mercy, surrender, lingered like a challenge. Longinus's heart, long buried under duty, stirred with a question he couldn't silence. What if everything I've known is wrong? The answer, though he couldn't yet grasp it, was about to rewrite his destiny. But one final act would seal Longinus's fate forever. One thrust of a spear broke a soldier's heart open. Even in death, Jesus held the power to change everything. Golgotha trembled in the aftermath of the crucifixion. The earth had quaked, rocks had split, and the temple's veil had torn in two. Longinus, the battle-hardened centurion, stood amid the chaos, his spear still in hand. His men, shaken by the unnatural darkness and tremors, looked to him for orders. The crowd, once jeering, now wailed in fear, some fleeing the hill. Longinus's orders were clear: confirm the deaths of the crucified. He approached Jesus' cross, his lifeless body hanging still, blood and sweat mingling on his torn flesh. Yet truth often hides in the smallest moments. Longinus raised his spear, its iron tip glinting faintly in the dim light. With a swift, practiced thrust, he pierced Jesus' side, just below the ribs. Blood and water poured forth, a crimson stream that splashed onto Longinus's hands and face. According to ancient tradition, that blood touched his eyes, clouded by years of injury, and his vision cleared instantly. He staggered back, his breath catching. The blood was warm, the water cool, and together they felt like a sign. Something sacred, something beyond his understanding. Longinus's heart pounded, not from fear, but from a truth he couldn't name. This was no ordinary man. The darkness lingered, heavy and oppressive. Longinus's men whispered of omens, their faces pale. He'd heard Jewish priests speak of prophecies, a Messiah whose death would shake the heavens. The torn veil, the quaking earth, the blackened sky, could these be the signs they foretold? Longinus looked at Jesus' face, serene even in death, and felt a weight settle in his chest. The blood on his hands wasn't just blood, it was a call. The water wasn't just water, it was a promise. In that moment, everything he'd known began to unravel. He'd served Rome, enforced its laws, spilled blood without question. But this blood was different. It spoke of forgiveness, of a love he'd never known. Yet truth demands more than wonder. It demands a choice. Longinus turned from the cross, his gaze sweeping the crowd. Faces blurred, soldiers, mourners, skeptics, all waiting for something. His mind raced. Jesus' words echoed, "Father, forgive them." His acts of mercy, even to a thief, lingered. The centurion's life had been order, duty, violence. But here on this hill, he faced a man who died for others, who loved despite hate. Longinus's voice, steady from years of command, broke the silence. Truly, this man was the Son of God. The words spilled out, shocking his men, silencing the crowd. A Roman, a pagan, proclaiming a Jewish carpenter divine? The declaration was reckless, dangerous, yet it felt like the only truth that mattered. But faith is a spark that ignites a fire. Longinus returned to his barracks that night, but sleep eluded him. The blood and water haunted his thoughts. The healed eyes, whether physical or spiritual, saw the world anew. He replayed Jesus' final hours, the forgiveness offered to enemies, the care for his mother, the surrender to a higher will. These weren't the acts of a rebel or a madman. They were the marks of someone, something greater. Longinus's world, built on Rome's unyielding power, cracked under the weight of what he'd seen. The Jews spoke of a God who redeemed, who loved beyond reason. Could that God have reached even him, a soldier stained by blood? The blood and water, in Christian tradition, were more than signs. They were symbols of God's grace. The blood, the life of Christ, offered redemption. The water, the cleansing spirit, promised new life. Longinus, though he didn't yet know these truths, felt their pull. His declaration on Golgotha wasn't just a moment, it was a turning point. He'd crossed a line, from enforcer of death to witness of life. The man who'd driven nails now bore a truth he couldn't unsee. But what does a soldier do when his heart awakens? The answer, though still forming, would lead him to a path he never imagined. Yet Longinus's journey was only just beginning. Where does a soldier go when faith rewrites his soul? When faith ignites, the old life burns away. Longinus, once a proud centurion clad in Rome's armor, stood at a crossroads after Golgotha. The blood and water from Jesus' side, the healed eyes, whether physical or spiritual, had shattered his world. He could no longer wield a sword for an empire that crucified the Son of God. In the quiet of his barracks, Jesus' words echoed, "Father, forgive them." The love he'd witnessed on the cross was a fire in his chest, demanding action. But where does a soldier go when his heart belongs to a new king? Longinus made a choice that would echo through history. He resigned, shedding his armor for a simple cloak, trading Rome's glory for a truth he couldn't unsee. Yet truth comes at a cost. Jerusalem buzzed with rumors in the days after the crucifixion. Whispers of an empty tomb, of disciples claiming Jesus had risen, reached Longinus's ears. He'd seen him die, felt the weight of that spear thrust. Yet these stories stirred hope. Driven by a hunger for answers, he sought out those who followed Jesus. In hidden corners of the city, he found them, men and women, Jew and Gentile, bound by a shared faith. They spoke of a Savior who conquered death, of a kingdom not of this world. Longinus, a Gentile outsider, expected rejection. Instead, they welcomed him, their eyes alight with the same fire he felt. This was no mere sect, it was a movement. Longinus's life as a soldier had been simple: obey, fight, survive. Now he faced a new battle, one of the spirit. He left Jerusalem, traveling north to Cappadocia, a rugged land of caves and cliffs. There he began to preach, his voice carrying the weight of a witness. "I saw him die," he declared, "and in his death I found life." His words drew crowds, hungry for hope in a world of Roman oppression. He spoke of Jesus' love, his forgiveness, his victory over the grave. But his message wasn't without risk. Roman authorities, wary of unrest, watched closely. Longinus, once their loyal servant, was now a rebel in their eyes. Yet he pressed on, driven by a truth too powerful to silence. Still, the path of faith is never walked alone. In Caesarea, a bustling port city, Longinus's testimony grew bolder. He stood in marketplaces, his weathered face lit with conviction, sharing the story of Golgotha. "I drove the nails," he confessed, "but his love redeemed even me." His words pierced hearts, drawing both Jews and Gentiles to the cross. Tradition holds he met disciples like Philip or Cornelius, early believers who saw in Longinus a sign of God's plan for all nations. The book of Acts speaks of Gentiles joining the faith, and Longinus's story fits this tide, a Roman soldier turned herald of the gospel. Longinus's preaching drew the wrath of Rome. His former comrades, now his captors, dragged him before a tribunal. "Renounce this Jesus," they demanded, "or die." Longinus, who'd once killed for the empire, now stood unafraid. "I saw him on the cross," he said, "and I will not deny him." Tradition tells of his execution, beheaded, his blood sealing his faith. Yet his death was not the end. He became Saint Longinus, the first Gentile witness, his name etched in the annals of the Church. His story, though shrouded in mystery, lives on in Cappadocia's ancient churches, in the hearts of those he led to Christ. What became of Longinus's followers? Did his words plant seeds that grew into communities of faith? The mystery of his life lies not in records, but in its impact. He was a spark in the early church, a sign that God's love reached beyond Israel to the ends of the earth. His transformation, from executioner to martyr, mirrors the gospel's power to redeem the unredeemable. Longinus' path was a testament. No one is too far gone for grace, but his story was part of a far greater plan. Could one man's faith spark an empire's transformation? Ancient voices whispered of a light for all the earth. Longinus, the centurion turned martyr, was more than a witness. He was a spark in a divine flame. His declaration on Golgotha, "Truly, this man was the Son of God," echoed beyond the hill. joining a chorus of voices that would reshape history. The prophets of old, like Isaiah, foretold a suffering servant whose wounds would heal the world, Isaiah 53 verse 5. Longinus, though a Gentile, became part of this promise, his conversion a sign of God's plan to reach every nation. His story was a thread in a tapestry far greater than he could imagine. Yet he was never alone in this mission. The apostles, Peter, John, Paul, and others, carried the same fire Longinus felt. They were ordinary men, fishermen, and tax collectors, yet they bore an extraordinary message: Christ crucified, risen and reigning. In Jerusalem's crowded streets, Peter preached to thousands, his words piercing hearts. Acts 2. In Antioch, Paul proclaimed Jesus to Gentiles, tearing down walls of division. Longinus's testimony, though less recorded, fit this pattern. In Cappadocia and Caesarea, he spoke of the cross, his voice a bridge between Jew and Gentile. But faith faces the crucible of opposition. The Roman Empire was a colossus of power, its legions crushing dissent, its gods demanding worship. Christians were mocked, arrested, fed to lions. Longinus, tradition holds, met a martyr's end, his blood mingling with those who died for Christ. Yet persecution only fanned the flames. The apostles pressed on, their only weapons love and truth. Paul wrote from chains, "The word of God is not bound," 2 Timothy 2:9. But the answer lay in promises older than Rome. The prophets had spoken of a day when all the ends of the earth will turn to the Lord. Psalm 22:27. Abraham's covenant promised blessing for all nations. Genesis 22:18. Longinus, a Roman, embodied this truth, his faith a sign that God's love knew no bounds. The apostles' preaching fulfilled these words, their message spreading like wildfire across the empire. By the 2nd century, churches dotted Asia Minor, Greece, and Rome itself. By the 3rd, believers faced waves of persecution, yet their faith held firm, and the empire began to bow. In 313 AD, Emperor Constantine, once a pagan, embraced Christianity after a vision of the cross. The Edict of Milan granted freedom to Christians, and the cross, once a symbol of shame, adorned Rome's banners. By the 4th century under Theodosius, Christianity became the empire's faith. The colossus that crucified Jesus now knelt at his feet. Longinus and the apostles, though long gone, had planted seeds that bore this fruit. Their faith, without swords or wealth, had conquered an empire. The mystery of Longinus's legacy lies in its ripple effect. His story, joined to the apostles, shows how faith can move mountains. The book of Revelation speaks of a multitude from every nation worshiping the Lamb, Revelation 7:9. Longinus, the first Gentile witness, was a glimpse of this future. His life proved that God's grace reaches the furthest heart, a soldier, a killer, a pagan. Today, every church, every hymn, every heart touched by the gospel carries echoes of their courage. The story of Longinus culminates in a powerful testament to faith's ability to transform even the hardest hearts, inviting us to reflect on our own journeys and act on the hope that endures. As the dust settled on Golgotha, Longinus stood transformed. A single drop of blood had opened his eyes, not just to see, but to believe. Truly, this man was the Son of God, he declared, and those words became his lifeline, his purpose, his salvation. But the story doesn't end there. Longinus's journey from executioner to Saint mirrors a promise that echoes through time. No one is beyond redemption. His courage to leave behind the might of Rome for the humble path of faith challenges us today. What are we clinging to that keeps us from God's grace? Like Longinus, we all face moments that demand a choice, to turn away or to step forward into the unknown, trusting in a love that never fails. Longinus's story intertwined with the apostles, ordinary men who carried an extraordinary message. Their faith, not their swords, would topple empires. From the ashes of persecution, they built a legacy of hope that still stands today. Their witness reminds us that God's promises are unshakable, even when the world feels dark. Each of us carries that same spark of faith, waiting to be kindled into action. What will you do with yours? The truth is simple yet profound. God never forgets His promises. Even when we feel lost, we are never beyond His reach. His love pursues us through every doubt, every failure, every cross we bear. Today, you might be standing at your own Golgotha, wondering if hope is possible. Let Longinus' story remind you, it is. Faith can transform your heart just as it did his. If this story stirred something in your soul, Share it with us in the comments below. How does Longinus's journey speak to your own?